Today I'm at the bench tying crappie jigs using marabou tips. Stay tuned. I think we're going to retie this. I don't like the way the angle of that camera was, but so good afternoon. In the vise, what we're going to use today is a 1/32. This is a ball head, nothing fancy, no special eyes or anything, and we're tying just a basic crappie jig, and I'm using marabou feathers, mainly the tips, marabou tips. This is some strung hackle. I have an entire bag of this. Let's just switch over here. I have a full bag of this, and it's just marabou strung together like a scarf. And I pick the pieces off that I need. I have similar marabou that I have in bulk that are just individual feathers. These aren't quite as full. These are much older. This is old inventory. If I was tying this jig with the feathers from this bag, I might double them up, maybe use 2 at a time. But from this strung marabou, I can just pull a few from the end, and as you can see, these are much fuller. You know, there's a lot of fluffiness to them. Here's an individual feather, and you know, that's pretty big, particularly for this size jig head that we're tying on. Like I said, this is just a 1/32. I'm going to take my 2/0 thread and lock it on in the center of the hook shank, and with touching wraps, walk the thread down towards the point of the hook. The thread is nothing special, it's just a round nylon, unwaxed. We're going to begin with taking our feather from the strung marabou, and the length of the tail will be the length of the body past the bend of the hook. Just adjust your pinch till you get the length that you wish. Keep this pinch tight. We lock this into place. There's a half dozen wraps or so towards the bend of the hook. And I just add a little bit of pressure to help those fibers rotate around the shank of the hook. And then a couple wraps back towards the head just to lock that into place. Before we continue, I'm going to add some Crystal Flash. This is a dark purple. It's a KF22. Crystal Flash 22. It's a nice purple. It's not terribly dark, and it has a lot of silvers and green and yellow flashes in it, but it's a nice color. And I'm just going to add 3 fibers of the Crystal Flash to each side. Lock that on with 5 wraps towards the bend of the hook and a couple wraps back towards the head. And I trim this the same length as the tail. Again, I flip my jig and I grab myself 3 Crystal Flash fibers. And again, I can lock this right into place. You want the crystal flash to lay right down the center of the jig, the side of the jig itself. And there's a half dozen wraps towards the bend of the hook. Trim this the same length as the tail. And at this point, walk my thread all the way up to the ball of the jig. Now there is a fairly dramatic step here at this point. The guy I'm tying these for likes a nice full bodied jig, and I accomplish that in two ways. You know, if you're using a thin chenille, you can overlap your wraps and even put on a couple layers depending on the thickness of your chenille. I like the bodies on my jigs to be uniform, the silhouette to look more uniform. So what we have here is a Danville chenille. Typically I use what they call a size 2, which is a medium size if you're buying chenille. This is, I think it's a 4. It's a little bit bigger. I would have to go back in my Danville collection, the sales pamphlet that I have, or package, that has their size chart, but this is, it's not quite large, but it's most certainly bigger than a medium size, a little bit fuller. Almost reminds me of the Antron chenille. Do I have some on my desk? Krystal Antron chenille seems a little bit thicker to me, and doesn't really compress. It's stiffer bristles, I guess you can explain it. So what I'm going to do here is I tied the chenille in up towards the head, and without wrapping it, I'm just going to hold it out of the way, and I'm going to wrap my thread all the way up back towards the bend of the hook to where my last wraps are from that crystal flash. That does fill in that step, and now I can walk my thread back towards the head of the jig. At this point I can take the chenille, I angle it towards the bend of the hook for the first wrap, and I bring it around, and then with touching wraps side by side, wrap my jig body. As I come around the jig the last time, I will take my chenille and bring it to the outside of my bobbin, so when I switch hands I can pick up my bobbin, lock it right into place. That's the easiest way I know to do that step. There's really no need to crisscross your bobbin and your thread and wrap and crisscross and wrap. Picking it up in that order will lock the chenille in place with very little effort. So there we have a little bit of purple. To finish this off, I'm going to take some small hackles, and this is a fairly inexpensive Chinese neck. As you can see, I've used an awful lot of the hackles from this section. I have a hackle feather like so. As I palmer this around the jig, I want the hackle fibers to extend at least the hook gap. Measuring this on a hackle gauge, it's about a 12 to 14. So I strip the hackle feather and snip it like so. So I can just hold this into place and lock it on. A few wraps over the stem, and then 2 wraps between the stem and the head of the jig. Kind of sandwiches it in place and locks it in place. And then I can take my hackle pliers, 2 to 3 wraps. 1, 2, and again, oop, that happens. 1, 2, and as I come around, just like with the chenille, my last wrap of the palmered hackle goes to the outside of my bobbin, so when I pick up my bobbin, locks it on automatically. Now, as I wrapped, I didn't hold back the fibers with my left hand. I was able just to angle my bobbin so the thread would ride along the top edge of the head of the jig, and as it slides into place, it pushes those fibers back. I'm going to finish this off with a whip finish tool. And again, angling it so the thread slides along the jig head. And 3 wraps is enough to secure it. And to finish this off, just a couple drops of head cement. And there we have it. Just a very simple crappie jig. I think that will do it for us today. As always, add some comments down below if you have any questions or you want to learn a little bit more on what we've done today. Hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any new content. Feel free to share any of the content that we create. It helps generate interest in the channel. And as always, guys, keep tying in tight lines.